James Grady didn't expect the sound of shattering glass to break his peaceful Saturday morning. It was just past 8:00 a.m. He had barely taken a sip of his coffee when the sharp crash echoed down the suburban street, the kind of sound that silences birds and turns stomachs. Instinct kicked in. He rushed out his front door barefoot, mug still in hand, heart suddenly hammering. The sight stopped him cold. His elderly neighbor, Mr. Holloway, was lying crumpled at the edge of his driveway, one arm twisted beneath him, face ashen and eyes half open. The toppled trash can beside him and a broken flower pot suggested he'd fallen hard. Mr. Holloway. James dropped his mug, sprinted over, and knelt beside him. The old man was breathing, but just barely. Shaking, James pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Emergency services. What's the situation? My neighbor collapsed. I think he had a stroke or a heart attack. He's unconscious. He needs help now. Help is on the way. Stay on the line. James placed his phone on speaker and tried to keep Mr. Holloway conscious, gently tapping his shoulder and speaking to him. Stay with me, sir. You're okay. Just hang on. Then, sirens, faint but growing louder. Relief surged through James. Help was coming. This was going to be okay. Until he turned around and saw it. A white BMW SUV, parked diagonally across his driveway. Clean, polished, and unmistakably Karen's. His stomach dropped. No, no, no. Karen, the self-appointed dictator of the HOA. The one who sent nasty notices for lawn heights and once threatened a teenager over mailbox paint. Everyone on the block knew her. Everyone avoided her. And she had just blocked his driveway on the exact morning a man's life hung in the balance. James scanned the neighborhood. No sign of her. Her house across the street sat silently. Curtains drawn. No movement. The ambulance turned onto the street, lights flashing. He sprinted toward it, waving his arms. Here, it's here. But she blocked the driveway. Just follow me on foot. The EMTs slowed, confused. Can you move the vehicle, sir? It's not mine. It's hers. James pointed furiously across the street. That HOA psycho parked it there. One EMT grabbed his gear and jumped out. The other tried to navigate around but found no angle wide enough to reverse or turn in. James ran back to Mr. Holloway as the first paramedic followed. We'll need to transport him fast. Does he have a history? A shrill voice suddenly sliced through the air like a knife. Excuse me, what is going on my street? James looked up and saw Karen, in a silky robe and slippers, standing on her porch with her arms crossed. I'm calling the HOA board. You can't bring emergency vehicles here without prior notice. James couldn't believe it. Mr. Holloway wheezed for breath. The ambulance sat idle. Karen was shouting about bylaws. And James knew, deep down, this situation was going to explode. James didn't have time for this insanity. Every second counted, and yet the white BMW SUV sat there like a smug blockade across his driveway, gleaming, stubborn, and utterly immovable. The EMTs were forced to park halfway down the street, sprinting uphill with a gurney that rattled against the uneven pavement. Who owns this damn car? One of them barked, breath tight with urgency. Her. James snapped, jabbing his finger toward the pristine colonial house with matching white shutters. Karen's. And right on cue, Karen descended from her porch like she was making an entrance on a reality show. Robe cinched, pearls glinting, latte in hand. She walked in deliberate strides, heels clicking against the pavement, every bit the queen of HOA Hill. You need to move your car, James shouted, voice ragged. He's dying, Karen. Karen looked unimpressed, raising a plucked eyebrow. Don't yell at me on my own street. I parked there because your grass clippings were blocking the cul-de-sac. It's a violation, just like your unapproved garden gnome. Are you out of your mind? He's having a heart attack. Karen didn't flinch. She took a sip of her coffee. Then the paramedics can walk. It's not my fault your guest is ill. He's not a guest. He's our neighbor. I wasn't notified of any emergency activity today, she said, calmly pulling out her phone and scrolling like she had all the time in the world. The HOA board requires at least 48 hours notice for events that involve large vehicles or noise disturbances. I'm afraid you're non-compliant. One EMT had already reached Mr. Holloway, attaching oxygen lines and calling vitals into his radio. The second stood behind James, shaking his head in disbelief. She's obstructing emergency access. We're calling PD. Please do, Karen huffed. Let's get the law involved. I've got full HOA authority over this block, and I'm tired of you renters disrespecting protocol. I own this house, James growled. And you're killing a man because you've got a God complex and a clipboard. The neighbors began to gather. First, Mrs. Delgado from the corner, then Mr. Tyson with his morning paper. Phones came out. Cameras clicked on. Someone whispered, "She's finally lost it." Karen didn't seem to notice, or maybe she didn't care. She smiled for the cameras like she was being interviewed. There's a reason this neighborhood is the cleanest in the zip code. Discipline, structure, rules. People like you bring chaos. The gurney wheels squeaked as the EMTs prepared to lift Holloway, but the uneven slope made it hard. One misstep, and they'd drop him. They needed driveway access. "Sir," one EMT barked to James, "she's obstructing patient transport. We need police here now." James looked into Karen's smug face, her eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, latte held like a scepter. He'd always thought she was ridiculous. Now he realized she was dangerous, and someone had just made the 911 call that would change everything. The ambulance sat at the end of the street like a caged beast, lights spinning, engine humming. But it couldn't move. Not forward, not sideways, not anywhere. Blocked. Karen's white BMW remained planted across James's driveway like a monument to madness. Two paramedics were already working on Mr. Holloway up on the lawn, but the gurney they'd need to safely transport him was stuck near the vehicle, wheels locked, unable to roll over the narrow path of grass and gravel. "Move the car." James was trembling with rage. His voice cracked, louder than he meant. "If he dies, that's on you." Karen stood her ground, lips curled in a rehearsed smirk. "If you threaten me again, I'll call my attorney." One of the EMTs turned to James, jaw clenched. "We've got to get him stabilized, but we can't lift him down without a backboard and stretcher. We need proper access. Now." James took 2 steps toward Karen, fists clenched. "Open your car. Move it. Right now. Or I swear." A high-pitched chirp interrupted him. Karen had pressed her key fob, not to unlock the vehicle, but to lock it again. Twice. With a smile. "Beep. Beep." "I said, I'm not moving it," she said with chilling calm. "You're violating neighborhood codes, endangering property lines, and this entire scene looks suspicious. I don't trust it. You people fake emergencies all the time to get out of violations. You people," James barked, stepping closer. The EMT instinctively stepped between them. "She's out of her mind," someone whispered from the growing crowd. Half the neighborhood was watching now. Phones up, jaws slack. The suburb's infamous HOA tyrant was now obstructing an actual emergency. The footage was live streaming. Comments were pouring in. "She's on a power trip. She's going viral. Someone call the news." And then, like fate had scripted it, Mr. Holloway groaned. Loud, strained, wet. His chest convulsed under the oxygen mask. "He's going into cardiac distress," shouted one EMT. "We need to transport him now. This is critical." James spun toward the paramedic. "Take my truck. Drive through my backyard. Smash the fence. Do whatever it takes." "Too narrow," the EMT said, voice rising. "We'd risk dropping him. "We need that driveway." Another neighbor shouted, "Why won't she move her car?" Karen, undisturbed, held up her clipboard, her infamous HOA weapon, like a holy relic. "You people think I'm the villain," she said, turning to the crowd, "but I maintain order. And this chaos, this is exactly what happens when rules are broken." The EMT was already dialing. "Dispatch, this is Medic 6. We have a hostile civilian actively obstructing a life-threatening emergency. Request immediate police response." James stared at Karen, breath shallow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. And now, the flashing ambulance lights were no longer a beacon of help. They were a spotlight on the woman who had finally gone too far. "Step away from the patient," Karen ordered, like she was addressing trespassers rather than emergency responders. The EMT ignored her. Pressure dropping. "We're losing him." Another neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, shouted from her porch, "Move your damn car, Karen." Karen barely turned her head. "This street has rules. We're not animals. If you want chaos, move to the east side." James could feel the blood pounding in his ears. This wasn't just about a blocked driveway anymore. It was about control. About how Karen had ruled the neighborhood for years, not through kindness or leadership, but through fear, fines, and relentless passive aggression. She was the HOA president, secretary, treasurer, and enforcer, because no one dared challenge her. And now, even as a man's life slipped away just 20 feet from her doorstep, she stood unmoved, because losing control terrified her more than death did. James stepped forward, trembling with rage. "You need to move that car before the cops get here, because when they do, I will tell them everything." Karen's face twitched. "Oh, I hope they come," she said. "Maybe they'll fine you for building an illegal patio extension, or for that unapproved security camera above your garage. You think I haven't noticed?" The crowd gasped. James blinked. "You've been spying on me." Karen raised her clipboard, tapping it like a magician's wand. "Nothing happens in this neighborhood without my knowledge. I've kept order here for 15 years. And you move in with your overgrown lawn, your loud music, and your untrimmed hedges." "He's dying, Karen," someone yelled. James clenched his jaw. "You talk about order, but you're the chaos. You use this HOA like it's a weapon. This isn't about rules. It's about you needing to feel powerful." Karen's smile cracked. But before she could reply, the sound of tires screeching echoed down the block. A police cruiser swung around the corner at full speed, followed by another. Their lights painted the houses in flashes of red and blue. Karen's expression shifted, still proud, but uneasy. She turned to James, her voice low and venomous. "You're going to regret this. I am the HOA." The EMT who had been on the phone waved his hands, pointing to the white SUV. "That's her vehicle. She's obstructing emergency medical transport. We've got the call on record." The first officer stepped out, already pulling his gloves on. "Ma'am," he said, walking toward Karen with directness, "we've received multiple reports that you're blocking emergency access." Karen drew herself up like a queen before a court. "I am the HOA president. This is my jurisdiction." The officer didn't blink. "And I'm a sworn officer of the law. You need to move your vehicle immediately." Karen's hand clutched the clipboard so tight it shook. "I'm not done with this neighborhood," she hissed. But everyone knew she was about to be. The EMT's voice rang sharp and urgent. "He's coding. We're losing his pulse." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Mr. Holloway's body convulsed slightly on the stretcher. The paramedics dropped into action, one initiating chest compressions while the other prepped the defibrillator. The scene had turned from chaotic to critical in a split second. James stood frozen, watching, helpless, angry, terrified. And Karen, she was still arguing. "He's clearly elderly," she snapped at the officer. "Maybe this is just natural. People get old, they collapse, it's tragic. but it doesn't mean I caused it. Ma'am, the officer warned, stepping forward. You are obstructing a medical emergency and interfering with rescue personnel. That is a criminal offense. I'm asking one final time. Move your vehicle. Karen scoffed. I'm not taking orders from a beat cop who doesn't even live here. Behind her, a second officer muttered into his radio. Requesting tow truck. White BMW blocking emergency lane. Suspect non-compliant. Potential detainment imminent. Karen turned back to the crowd, as if she still had supporters there. But they were gone. Oh, they were still watching. Phones raised and recording every second, but the flicker of neighborhood sympathy had vanished. Now there was only judgment. Fury. Disbelief. James took a trembling step toward her, his voice like sandpaper. If he dies, it's blood on your hands. Karen met his eyes with a hollow stare. You think you're the hero. You broke Code 14B last month, overwatering your lawn. You're no better than anyone else here. Suddenly, clear. A blast from the defibrillator made Karen flinch, but she didn't turn. The EMT shouted, Come on, Holloway. Come back to us. Don't let her win. Another voice yelled, Where's that backboard? Still blocked. Still nowhere to roll the gurney. And then, like fate had had enough of the games, Karen's phone rang. A shrill, repetitive ringtone. Everyone stared as she glanced down. Her eyes widened, just for a second. She silenced it, then forced a thin smile. Everything's under control here, she muttered, almost to herself. James noticed the twitch in her jaw, the tremble in her hand. She was unraveling, but not fast enough. A third clear. Another jolt. Mr. Holloway's body jerked. Then silence. Pulse. The EMT shouted, It's faint, but he's back. Relief rippled through the crowd like a silent prayer. But the celebration was cut short as the officer stepped beside Karen. Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for obstruction of emergency services. You can't. No, this is my neighborhood. James watched as she clutched the clipboard to her chest, like it could protect her. Like it meant something. But no rule, no code, no HOA fine could stop the officer's hand from snapping cold metal around her wrists. The crowd gasped as the handcuffs clicked. Karen's rein had cracked. But no one, not even James, was ready for the secrets her clipboard was about to reveal. The cold click of the handcuffs silenced the entire street. Karen, the untouchable HOA tyrant, stood stunned, mouth slightly open, her infamous clipboard clutched in her bound hands. She looked less like a queen now, and more like a statue, frozen under the weight of her own delusion. You don't understand, she murmured, eyes darting toward the crowd. I am the system here. You're under arrest, the officer said firmly, guiding her toward the cruiser. Anything you say can and will be used against you. But I have authority. She shrieked, twisting in place. You can't arrest authority. The second officer held up Karen's clipboard. This yours. Karen turned white. Don't touch that. He flipped it open. What should have been filled with maintenance violations and lawn care warnings wasn't. Sir, the officer said quietly to his partner. You're gonna want to see this. James, still breathing hard near the paramedics, looked up just in time to see a stack of photocopies, envelopes, and printed photographs fall from between the pages. What the hell? Someone whispered. The officer pulled out a thick folder labeled Incident, Pending Enforcement. Inside were photos of neighbors' homes, zoomed in through windows. People eating dinner, couples arguing, kids playing in backyards. And beneath each photo, handwritten notes. Delgado's dog barks too much. Possible ordinance fine. May need animal control. Tyson receives unmarked packages weekly. Suspected business activity. File IRS tip anonymously. Grady seen hosting guests past 10 p.m. Alcohol visible. Report to zoning. James's blood ran cold. She hadn't been watching the neighborhood. She'd been stalking it. Karen's voice cracked from the back of the cruiser. Those are my records. for keeping the community safe. The crowd recoiled, voices rising. She took pictures of my kids. That's my living room. She reported me to the IRS. The officer closed the clipboard like it was radioactive. We'll be seizing this for evidence. Then, a new sound. Another cruiser, followed by an unmarked black SUV. From it stepped a man in a dark blazer and sunglasses, flashing a badge too quickly for most to see. His presence was different. Federal. He approached the first officer and spoke quietly. The two conferred for a few tense seconds, then turned to Karen. "Karen Monroe," the man in the blazer asked, "you're also being investigated for potential misuse of HOA funds and surveillance without consent. We have a warrant to search your residence." Karen's face crumpled. For the first time, she looked afraid. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. "I was protecting this neighborhood. I built it." James stepped closer, his voice low and bitter. "No, Karen, you watched it, controlled it, and you almost got someone killed doing it." The SUV's back door opened. Karen didn't scream this time. She just looked up at her kingdom, her perfect street, and realized no one was looking back. Karen Monroe was no longer the neighborhood queen. She was a criminal, handcuffed, bundled into an unmarked SUV, and carted away like a criminal mastermind whose empire had finally collapsed. The crowd was stunned, whispering, shaking their heads in disbelief. But James wasn't looking at the police. He was staring at the clipboard. The contents, the photographs, the notes, the files were still fresh in his mind. And he had to know more. What was all that? He asked one of the officers, his voice a mixture of anger and shock. The officer gave him a weary look, clearly dealing with 100 things at once. "That's just the tip of the iceberg. We've been investigating Monroe for months. She's been monitoring the neighborhood with hidden cameras, filing false reports, and even making anonymous complaints to the city, all for personal gain. She's been using the HOA to collect fines, and in some cases, extort neighbors into paying up or face ridiculous penalties." The officer's words hung in the air, chilling James. "Do you know how deep it goes?" James asked, voice rising with growing concern. "How many people has she targeted?" The officer nodded grimly. "You have no idea. We've been tracking her for a while now, but it's been hard to get evidence. She's careful, too careful. But we knew something was off when the HOA funds didn't add up. When we pulled her records, we found the surveillance data." James' stomach turned. The realization hit him like a freight train. She'd been watching everyone. All of them. The officer handed James a small folder from his jacket, the edges worn and the seal stamped with official insignia. "Take a look. You've been a victim of her as much as anyone else here. You deserve to know the truth." With shaking hands, James opened the folder. Inside were printouts of bank transfers, documents from the HOA's financial records, and a list of names. Names James recognized. Neighbors he'd waved at in passing. He scanned the pages, eyes wide with disbelief. "Monroe's been siphoning HOA fees into her own accounts," the officer explained. "And not just that. She's been secretly recording conversations with people, even setting up her own fake inspections to threaten people into paying additional fines for petty things. She's been using the threat of fines to manipulate everyone." James ran his finger down one particular line. "Grady, property line violation. Suggested fine, $5,000. Possible leverage, rental property. Leverage. She had something on me," James whispered. His heart thudded in his chest. What could she have possibly? The officer's face grew grave. "Your rental property. You were renting without notifying her, weren't you? That's why she kept sending you warning letters about your lawn and your security camera. She was hoping you'd pay her to keep quiet. If you didn't, she'd use the HOA to get you fined." James's blood ran cold. He had thought all those warnings were just part of the usual HOA nonsense. He never imagined they were part of a bigger scheme. The most disturbing thing, the officer continued, is the way she manipulated people's personal lives. She knew everything. Everything. James slammed the folder shut, disgusted. How did it go on for so long without anyone noticing? The officer shook his head. She had everyone afraid. She weaponized the HOA. No one dared challenge her. She knew how to manipulate the rules to her advantage. That's why people like Holloway and the Delgados always gave in to her. They didn't want the fines or the hassle. But that's over now, James muttered, feeling a cold sense of finality wash over him. The officer nodded. For now. But the damage she's done isn't easy to undo. You might want to consider joining a new HOA board when this is all over, something to protect people from her kind of control. As the crowd dispersed, murmurs of disbelief rippling through the air, James stood alone, staring at the empty street. Karen was gone. The truth was out. But the question that gnawed at him was simple. How many more were still out there, waiting to take her place? The morning after Karen Monroe's arrest, the neighborhood was still buzzing, caught between disbelief and relief. News vans lined the streets, cameras flashing as reporters scrambled for sound bites. People gathered in small groups, gossiping about what they had witnessed and speculating about what might happen next. James stood in front of his house, feeling the weight of the past few days pressing down on him. The police had already combed through Karen's property and removed several more files, but they hadn't told him everything yet. There were still too many questions, too many rumors. The officer from the night before had promised that Karen would face serious charges. Embezzlement, unlawful surveillance, fraud, even extortion. Her days as the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood were over, but James knew that wouldn't be the end of it. The damage had been done. A soft voice broke his thoughts. "You all right?" Mrs. Delgado, his neighbor, asked, walking up beside him. Her face was tired, eyes red from lack of sleep, but there was a glimmer of hope in her expression. "I don't know," James replied, staring at the empty street where Karen's car had once been. I feel like this whole thing is just the beginning." Mrs. Delgado nodded. "You're right, but at least we know the truth now. We can't change what happened, but we can make sure it never happens again." James smiled weakly. "You're right. We can rebuild." The police officer who had helped him the night before, Officer Harris, walked over and gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. "I'm glad you're all right, Mr. Grady. We've pulled all of Karen Monroe's files from her records, and we're starting the process of notifying all the victims. You'll be hearing from us soon." Victims, James repeated, the word sinking in. He had never thought of himself as one of Karen's targets. It had always seemed like petty harassment, just HOA nonsense. But now, knowing what she was capable of, it hit harder than he expected. "Did you find anything else?" James asked. "We did," Officer Harris replied, his voice low. "There's more to her than just controlling this neighborhood. She was part of a larger network, an underground group of people using similar tactics in HOA-run communities. They use fear, surveillance, and manipulation to keep their power, and they've done it in dozens of towns. Monroe was just the most successful one." James's blood ran cold. "So she wasn't the only one?" "No, and there's a chance there are others just like her, waiting for their moment." Mrs. Delgado's face turned pale. "You mean this isn't over? She won't just disappear?" "I don't know," Officer Harris admitted, "but we're taking it seriously now. We're going to expose as many of these groups as we can." The realization hit James hard. This was a war, not just against a single person, but a system built on control and fear. "Karen Monroe isn't the end," James said, his voice steady now. "But she's a start. It's time we fight back, not just against her, but against everything she represents." Officer Harris nodded. "You're right. This isn't just about one bad apple. It's about protecting everyone from this kind of abuse, and we're going to make sure it never happens again." The crowd around them murmured in agreement. The news vans, the flashing lights, the reporters, they were all just the backdrop for something much bigger. James felt a sense of resolution settle in his chest. The battle was far from over, but they had taken the first step. The darkness that Karen had cast over the neighborhood was lifting, and for the first time in years, the community was starting to feel like a place where they could finally breathe again. "Let's make sure this never happens again," James said, turning toward Mrs. Delgado and Officer Harris. "Let's fight back. For good." And in that moment, he knew something had changed. It wasn't just about the neighborhood anymore. It was about the kind of world they wanted to live in. A world where power wasn't something you took, but something you earned. A world where no one, no matter how much they tried to control others, would ever be allowed to hold it over them again. And for the first time in a long time, James felt like he had a place in it.